Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Brian. In today's video we're going to be taking a look or doing an in-depth review on this Festool table saw. It's a tool that I've owned for more than a year and I've put it through its paces. One of the first considerations is that you can buy this table saw with several combinations, meaning that you can buy just the table saw itself, or this is the basic set. You can buy the table saw and the 18-volt batteries together, or you can buy the table saw, the 18-volt batteries, and the stand all together. Before discussing the table saw, I'm going to break down the peripherals that come with the whole kit. So let's start with the batteries. So our batteries are 18-volt batteries. They go on this charging stand. It's pretty easy to slide them on. When you put them on initially, you'll get a blinking light. This goes back to a solid light whenever they're fully charged. It takes about 40 to 45 minutes for them to recharge. This was a concern when I first bought the table saw, but typically I just take a break. If I'm in the middle of something, I move on to something else, but I find that 40 to 45 minutes is not too long for me to pause in between cuts if I need to. Battery life is another consideration. Initially when buying this saw, I wondered how long the batteries would last. I still don't know that, but I do know after owning it for a year, I haven't noticed any degradation in how long the batteries last. And despite the fact that Milwaukee and other companies make an 18-volt battery, you cannot use them in place of the Festool 18-volt battery. Installing your batteries is relatively simple. When you first get your saw, this is what you will do. You take your battery, hold it horizontal. There's some tracks here for it to slide into. They're a little difficult to find actually, but to get it seated, but it's not too bad. And you'll feel it click. I hear it click once you get into the right place. Once you slide it in, you hear it click and then you're installed. Certainly another question you might have about battery life is whether or not a recharge battery will last long enough to build a project. So can you go most of a day using those batteries? And I found that when cutting hardwood, I can go for a very long time when using these batteries. So I don't feel that I'm limited by the battery life in a given situation. So if you're building a piece of furniture, I might find that I'll recharge it once over the course of building that piece of furniture. But if I'm putting down hardwood flooring or framing a house, you're certainly going to have to charge it much more. The next peripheral piece of equipment that comes with the table saw with the kit is the stand. And this is worth talking about for several reasons. So I'm going to start with some of the things I like. So the first feature that I like is this flip up piece right here. This acts as an off-feed table whenever you're rip cutting longer pieces of material. This works very well. I really like it. It does a good job. The next thing that you should be aware of is that all these legs do fold in. So you could pack up this table and store it away if you don't use it very often. Another consideration is the height of this table. You know, when you put this on the ground and you put your table saw on it, is your table saw at a proper height? And that is yes. It seems to be a comfortable height for cutting many materials. Overall, this fold up piece here that acts as your off feed table also acts as a dolly. So you can fold the legs up and use these wheels as a dolly and roll around your table saw if you put it into the sustainer. So all these features work very well. They're nice features for taking the saw to a job site. If we're now looking at this from the lens of a woodworker who uses this inside a very compact shop, now we have a different perspective. So for this cart, it's not a roller cart. So you can't easily reposition the table saw throughout your shop, and that's because they've put on the bottom of these legs, they put rubber coating and not locking roller wheels. So I would have rather have had a stand that had locking roller wheels there than I would have these coated pieces of rubber that is mainly, this whole thing works mainly for going to a job site as opposed to moving it to a different location within your workshop. Another thing to note is that the batteries and the charger come with a sustainer. While this is good for when you buy it or when you maybe want to tote the batteries and the charger to a job site, it's also just another thing to store in your workshop, and if you have a limited amount of space, this is something I wish I actually didn't have. Similar to the batteries, The table saw itself comes with a sustainer. Inside the sustainer on the top is a dust bag shown here. This simply mounts onto the dust connection port. I haven't found this to be too useful, but if you're in an enclosed area and you don't have access to a dust extractor, that's a minimum expectation you can rely upon. We also have our miter gauge right here. We have a riving knife with a blade cover, and we also have our rip fence. One other thing to note is that there's 5 different types of blades that you can get for your Festool table saw. And here it shows those on a card that's inside the bottom of your sustainer. The one that the table saw comes with is a fine cut blade, but you may wish to try some of these other ones. To power on our saw, all we do is push this green button. You'll see a green light to tell you that the table saw is on. To start a blade, we push the green button, and to stop the blade, we push the red button. I'm now going to demonstrate one of my favorite features of this table saw. While I was initially a little bit apprehensive about having digital controls for the blade height and blade angle, it turns out that this is a really useful and helpful feature. Here I select the top green button, and then I use the rotating knob to raise the saw blade. By selecting the bottom green button, I'm able to use the rotary dial to change the blade angle as well. So in this clip, I change the blade angle, bring it back to 0, and also lower the saw blade as well. Once again, dialing in a specific blade height or a blade angle is a really useful feature and is one of my favorite features of this table saw. If we look at the back side of our table saw, you have a couple options to deal with dust. The first one is that they have this port here, and you can use your dust bag. The dust bag essentially locks into some slots, and you rotate this and it stays on. Alternatively, you can use a 27mm hose, and this fits on the inside, and that fits into here, and you can use that for dust extraction. I don't want you to believe that this is the only thing we're going to say about dust extraction, because we're going to revisit that topic later, but this is how you use that port that they have on the back. Another thing that's housed on the back side of your table saw is this Allen wrench. This Allen wrench is useful for changing the riving knife and also changing the blade. The next thing we're going to talk about is this area of our table saw, and this is where we're going to put our miter gauge. But you should notice that there's an additional slot in our table saw. And here what I wanted to show you is that the standard Festool clamps will fit into here, and you could use those if you wanted to lock something down, a workpiece down. And you can put those in from either direction, or use any of the other Festool clamps that work on the MFT table. In addition to that, this is where our miter gauge comes in. Our miter gauge goes in this T-slot that's here. Here you should note that the T-slot that is made in here is not a universal T-slot, so your Incra jig or your jig that works on your Delta table saw or some other table saw probably will not work in the Festool table saw. To put this in, there's a series of levers. So there's a lever that pops out here, and you slide in your miter gauge, and you can lock it down. And while you can move this back and forth like that, it has a little bit of free play in it. So typically what you would do is you would lock that down, and there's a different lever further down that allows you to move this whole table. And this table is quite smooth. It works really well. It feels very accurate, and I can adjust my miter gauge here so that it's out of the way of my blade and lock that down. You can change the angle on the back here, just like many miter gauges, and it has detents at set positions that are common angles you might use, like 45, 22.5, and 15 degrees. Very similar to other table saws and those detent slots, but this is a unique feature. I've been thinking about things you might do with this sliding table, because most table saws do not have a sliding table like this that are put on the top next to the blade, and so this might allow you to create some different jigs that could be used for this table saw that aren't compatible with others. One additional thing to note is that if you move your roller table back and out of the way, there is a place here where you can use your Allen wrench, and this will allow you to change the blade and change the riving knife, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll do that in a moment. To remove your miter gauge, you simply lock down that tab, open this tab, and slide it out. The next thing we want to talk about is rip cuts. And so for a rip fence, we have this rip fence that slides into the slot here, and whenever you lock it down, it becomes solid and grabs onto the table. With this distance here, without using the extra capacity, you have about a 6-inch wide cut. There's an additional flip up table that you can pop up, and when you slide that table out, you get somewhere a little over 11 inches that you can cut for width. The width that you can cut is actually somewhat small, and if you need more than that, I think that they're thinking that you'll use a track saw. Another important feature about the rip fence is that you want to be able to cut work pieces with a rip fence that does not lean inward towards the back part of the blade. And so Festool does have the ability, if you take this, there's a screw on that back side that will allow you to adjust the toe in, toe out. In addition to that, when you're cutting work pieces that aren't very wide, you may want to use the integrated push stick. This is a very nice feature, and this will keep your hands away from the saw blade. I'm gonna take this out and show you that there's a lever right here that you could back out, and this will allow you to do something interesting with this blade that I didn't realize for quite some time. When you're wanting to cut a workpiece at an angle, but you're still trying to keep your hands away from the blade, we'll raise the blade to take a look. So when you raise this blade and you angle it, it angles toward the rip fence. And so this essentially cuts off the distance that you have for safety with your hands. So if you would like to have your hands be a little further away, one of the things you can do is you can take this off and you can reorient this so that your rip fence is like this, and now you can guide your workpiece along this edge instead of the original edge, which was up here. And this gives you a place to keep your fingers, a little more space. We're now going to change or take off the table saw blade and change out the riving knife. So to do this, the first thing we want to do is power down the table saw. So this is the most important step. And in addition to that, I see no reason why I need batteries connected either. I might accidentally bump the power on, and so I just go ahead and I'll always take the batteries out. So we now have the batteries removed. We next need to move the sliding table out of the way so we have access to this area. And so we can use this to remove, and the Festool was so nice as to show you which direction is unlocking and which direction is locking. And then there you can see that we now have access to the blade. If you reach down inside of here, you can use this Allen wrench, and there's also a locking lever here that you can use so you can change the blade. We rotate this in the same direction the blade rotates when it's running. Now there are a couple of levers in here. The one you want to push is this big green one here in the back, and the blade's indexed, so you have to rotate the blade a little bit until you get it to catch, and then once you have that in that position, you can take your Allen wrench, rotate it forward, and then you're able to take this off and just spin it by hand. And take it out. Our next step is to take this nut off our table saw blade. So we can remove that and our blades will fall down. We can take the throat plate out and then raise this up and remove our saw blade. Here I want you to notice the difference between what was a typical table saw blade to me. It's a 10-inch table saw blade with a 5/8 of an inch arbor. And if we make the comparison to the Festool blade, this is much smaller, and in addition it looks like the arbor is neither the same size either. I believe I was told this is a 20mm size. I have seen where others have talked about using a larger blade than the one that Festool provides. However, I've never tried this. When they've talked about it, you need to calibrate your zero height for your table saw to be correct again, because if you use a larger blade, this will stick out and come through the surface of the table quicker. To release the riving knife, there's a shiny lever in here that you can push, and in theory this comes up really easily, but I found that sometimes I need to use a pair of pliers to pull this up, so I use these in combination to pushing that, and just once I get it up just a little bit, then I can do it by hand. One thing we might want to do is we might want to place the riving knife with this piece, which is a riving knife as well, but it also has a blade guard. So we can push this into that same slot. And that locks in. There. To reinstall our blade, we just reverse our procedure by putting the shiny side out, inserting this, then we put this in on our blade once it's in location, and also our nut. To tighten your blade, you do need to push down on this big green lever that's here in the back. This will lock the blade so that whenever you're tightening this, your blade won't simply spin, but you can use that to tighten the nut. When putting everything away, one of the things you'll need to know is that there's several of these parking locations. For instance, you see this P on your miter gauge, and you can rotate this knob so that you can slide this, and then you put that, align those two P's, tighten that, and then you're able to take this out. In addition, you can loosen this knob, put this angle where the P lines up, and lock it down, and then you can put it in your sustainer. The rip fence also has a park location, or when you pack this up, and here there's a P on the side of the table saw and a P on the back of the rip fence, and you just line those two up, lock that down, and then you can pack up your table saw. When it comes time to lower the auxiliary shelf, you simply put your fingers on a tab that's here and also on the back side that supports the auxiliary shelf. Push those in, and that will allow it to lock, and then to raise it again, you just push that green lever and push it up. Now it's time for some opinion. So in this section, I should state that I'm not being paid by Festool. This is a tool that I purchased myself. I've used it for the last year, so I'm under no pressure to give you a delightful or a slanted view. The first thing I would say that this is a small and compact table saw. It's not going to be for everyone. It does not have a large workspace. You can't cut very large pieces. The maximum width of something you can cut is about 11 inches, and the maximum blade height that you can raise this is 1 7/8. So if you're cutting a lot of 8/4 pieces, sometimes you'll need to flip those over, or you'll have to use a hand plane or joiner in order to remove that extra little bit. Again, so this is not for everyone. It primarily seems to be made for going to a job site and doing carpentry, and not necessarily woodworking. Now that I've said that, I find that it cuts adequately through hardwood. I use it in hard maple, cherry, walnut, oak, and it cuts adequately through all those materials. Perhaps my primary pet peeve about this tool is that it's a Festool, and in my mind, the Festool tools that I've worked with in the past had excellent dust collection. The dust collection on this tool is actually very poor. I find that a lot of dust does blow out of the back port that they have here, but there's still a lot of dust that blows over onto the top of the table saw. I think perhaps one of the reasons is this throat plate. It's not a zero clearance throat plate. This is much wider than the saw blade, and one of the things I'm looking at investigating is whether or not, if I make a zero clearance throat plate for this table saw, whether it'll improve the dust collection. Another important question is if I've ever had any problems with the table saw. The answer to this is yes. I have had a warning that came about when trying to raise the saw blade. Essentially, the table saw locked up, and then I got an error message that said reference drive can't. Without further knowledge, this is completely useless feedback, and you will find the owner's manual to not be helpful at all. However, I did find someone else that had a similar problem in the Festool owners group, and they hinted at some of the things that they did. For me, the thing that resolved this problem was flipping over the table saw and taking off the bottom. When I did, this was what I saw in the picture. So you can see that a lot of sawdust gets inside the sawdust cabinet. And so I vacuumed all that sawdust out and then put the bottom back on the table saw, flipped it back over, repowered it up, and everything started working. And now for a tough question, and that question is, would I buy this table saw again? And the answer is mixed. The answer is somewhat yes, in that I would buy this table saw and the battery unit, but I really do not like the stand. I think the stand should be for what I use it for in my shop. I would rather have a roller stand that I can lock, so I can move it out of the way and move it to different places in my shop and make use of it. I think the stand is good for some people if you're taking it to a work site all the time and that's how how you use it, but it's not good for the shop other than being a stand, and I feel like I can build the stand for a fraction of the cost that the stand cost. One last thing to comment on for the Festool table saw is the lack of a plug-in. We have no ability to be able to plug this in directly to an outlet when our batteries go down. This would be a nice additional feature. In addition, it would be nice to be able to plug it in just like you can all your other Festool tools, and when you start the table saw, have the dust extractor start. That way the two are working together. If you have any questions, feel free to leave us a comment and we'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in a video real soon.